2023. We are honored to present Dr. Robin. She's a distinguished professor in the Department of Neuroscience at the University of Lethbridge, focusing on the influence of prenatal experiences on brain development. Her impactful work aims to enhance children's outcomes by improving executive function skills through play. Today, she'll lead the research session on building executive functions and self-regulation in the classroom through play. Welcome, Dr. Robin Gibb.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to be here with you this morning, or I guess in the afternoon if you're elsewhere in the world. But if we could have the slides, please. Okay. Awesome. So what I wanted to share with you today is some of the work that we've been doing over the past almost 2 decades, and it involves reminding teachers that it is important for their students to have an opportunity to play in order to build the skills that they need to be successful in school and later on in life. So my presentation today is Building Brains Together, Supporting Executive Function in Children and Youth through Play. Next slide, please. So executive functions are a set of skills that help us define what it is that we want to accomplish and then help us achieve those goals. There are 3 main categories of executive function, and they include working memory, cognitive flexibility, and behavioral inhibition. Now, there's many others that fall under this umbrella as well, and you'll often hear people talking about problem solving, paying attention, monitoring what it is you're doing, planning and organizing materials, self-regulation, and emotional control. And all of these contribute to the functions of the executive system. So the executive system is the prefrontal cortex in our brain, and the prefrontal cortex has connections throughout the rest of the brain, and it's very highly connected to the emotional centers in our brain. So it helps us interpret the situations that we find ourselves in. It turns out that executive function skills in preschoolers are a better predictor of their school readiness than even IQ. And it also turns out that executive function skills predict a student's math and reading competency throughout their academic careers. Next slide, please. If you have well-developed executive function skills in children, it also promotes what we call resiliency. And resiliency is that ability after some sort of a stressor or event in a child's life to bounce back and continue on with life in a normal sort of fashion. So resiliency is an important skill, particularly after the pandemic has had such a negative impact on people. And it turns out that well-developed executive function skills can help support that resiliency. Next slide, please. Resiliency is also enhanced by a very famous hormone that we talk about a lot in neuroscience, which is called the bonding hormone, or oxytocin. So when oxytocin is released, it helps buffer our stress. And if you're in the presence of an attached adult as a child, it will actually be released at that point to help you buffer your stress. It enhances brain plasticity when it's released, and it also helps individuals overcome adversity through that relationship. So nurturing relationship is an important means by which people can overcome adversity and move forward without having negative impacts, that adversity having a negative impact on their brains. And because humans are social beings and thrive on relationship, oxytocin plays a huge role in building resiliency. Next slide, please. So resiliency, as I just mentioned, is conferred by relationship. If we look at the chromosomes that are in all of the cells in our body, it turns out that at the very ends of the chromosomes, and you can see at the bottom the pink areas, those pink areas on the ends of the chromosomes are what we call telomeres. And as a person gets older, the telomeres get shorter on a chromosome. And telomeres, the length of the telomeres defines how many times a cell can divide. So when the telomeres become shorter, it reduces the number of times a cell can divide before it dies. It's natural with aging, but if a person has toxic stress, it also reduces the length of those telomeres. Now, what I find fascinating is you can rebuild telomeres with positive and nurturing relationships. And so you can enhance the length of those telomeres just by having a nurturing relationship in your life. And for me, that is exactly what teachers are there for their students. They can provide those nurturing, positive relationships. Next slide, please. We do know that if you look at executive function skills in children between the ages of 3 and 10 years of age, and then look at them, those very same people 30 years later, children who had shown inadequate executive function skills, when they become adult, have worse mental and physical health outcomes, they earn less money, and they commit more crimes. Now, those studies were controlled for IQ, gender, and socioeconomic status. So I read a paper way back in 2011 by Terry Moffat and her colleagues, which was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And she made a claim that if we can even make small improvements in executive function, it would translate into improvements in health, wealth, and a lower crime rate for an entire nation. Next slide, please. So in our area, in Alberta, Canada, the Alberta government decided to do a provincial scan on how well prepared kindergartners were for kindergarten using an instrument called the Early Development Instrument. Now, this is an instrument that was developed in Canada, but it's used throughout the world. It looks at a kindergartner's development in 5 domains, including physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and thinking skills, and communication and general knowledge. Next slide, please. In 2013, the government encouraged parent groups and any programming for children to come together in coalitions and share information in order to strengthen programming for those preschoolers. There were about 100 of them formed in Alberta at that time. Now, since then, they've dissolved them all, which is unfortunate, but it was a really important time for us here in Alberta to have these coalitions where we could all share information about children and how best to program for them. Now, I was invited by the Alberta government and to come to a conference in Edmonton, and the Harvard Center of the Developing Child was there. And they made an announcement to a group of people that they had been scanning Alberta to see areas of opportunity, and they felt that the city where I lived, Lethbridge, was an opportunity waiting to happen for children. So they brought in 3 communities, and Lethbridge was one of them. And then they gave us a little bit of money to start a program in Lethbridge that we thought would make a difference for preschoolers. Next slide, please. So when we got the results back of the Early Development Instrument, I was alarmed because Alberta is shown here. Here, Canada, this shows how many children in Canada are having great difficulty in one area of development and great difficulty in 2 areas. So you can see that about a quarter of Canada's children are having difficulty in at least one area of that early development instrument. In Alberta, our numbers were higher. So it was almost 29% with one area of development and about almost 15% with 2 areas of development. But what really alarmed me was Lethbridge's children were showing even worse outcomes than Alberta or the rest of Canada. And you can see in some areas of our city, up to 40% were experiencing developmental issues in at least one domain, and 25% had issues in two domains. So, as a neuroscientist who studies neurodevelopment, I was concerned that in our city, where we have a university and a college that also has a program on early childhood education, that we weren't serving our children properly. Next slide, please. So, one thing we do know about executive function skills is they can be learned from infancy onwards and they can be strengthened with practice. We also know that there can be some transfer between executive functions, those three main categories that I mentioned: working memory, cognitive flexibility, and behavioral inhibition. So, if you work on those categories, you get a little bit of transfer from one to the other as far as improvements go, but you actually have to work on all three in order to have improvements across the board. We do know that executive function skills can be enhanced through musical training, language learning, mindfulness practices, through sports and physical activity with instruction, sometimes through some computer games, and then through playful activities. Next slide, please. So why we picked play was we know that play reduces stress, it brings joy, and it strengthens relationship. And we really wanted to do that between the teachers and the students. It also enhances creativity. And what our key effect that we were looking for was strengthening those executive function skills. Next slide, please. So we developed a curriculum of games with a PhD student in my lab, and we went through the primary literature and looked at games that were supposed to make a difference for executive function in preschoolers. And we picked 10 of those games, and we put together this curriculum that we then gave to preschool teachers in our city. We did some testing prior to the games being used in the classroom and testing afterwards. And this little game bag just shows all of the games that constitute the 10 games in our curriculum. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can go to our website, buildingbrains.ca, and we have all of the games posted there. All of the resources are absolutely free for downloading. So if you're interested in looking at games for preschoolers, we have a section on that. We have a section on games for adolescents as well. Next slide, please. So the testing showed us that here we see pre-test in blue, post-test. This is after the curriculum of games in orange. And what we saw was that various tests that we gave the children, like building a Lego model, they became far more accurate after playing games for 6 weeks in the classroom. Fruit Loop accuracy, when we called out a color of a little breakfast cereal that they were supposed to pick up and eat in order, they did that better after playing these games. The block building accuracy, this is with bigger blocks, they were much more accurate after playing the games. We also did this little test called grass and snow, where the children are given a piece of green paper and a piece of white paper, and the experimenter will either say grass or snow. So if they say snow, the child is supposed to touch the green paper, and if they say grass, the child is supposed to touch the white paper. So as you can imagine, that takes some thinking and making sure that you inhibit your natural tendency to touch the green paper when you hear the word grass, and touch the white paper when you hear the word snow. So you can see that we have a significant improvement in that test as well. And block building time went down. They became far faster at building these little models after playing the games for this program period of at least 6 weeks. Next slide, please. We also do a standardized ages and stages questionnaire, which is used across Canada. And this questionnaire takes into account that over time, a child becomes older and they should have more skills. So anytime we see a bump up after a program in the level of performance of a skill, that means that they're actually improving in that skill. And what we saw with the ages and stages questionnaire in the domains of communication, problem solving, and personal social skills, the children's scores went up across the board after the curriculum of games. When we look at the social emotional index on the ASQ, it went down, and that is in the right direction. That means they're gaining better self-control. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of windows of brain plasticity throughout the time of development. That first period is between the ages of about 3 and 5 in the preschool period, but the second period is about between the ages of 12 and 25 years of age. So we decided we were going to target that next. Next slide, please. One of the reasons we decided we wanted to address adolescents and making sure that they had resiliency and building some good executive function skills there is there was an article printed in the Calgary Herald. Calgary is a city just a little bit north of Lethbridge in Alberta, just this spring, and it talked about some of the issues that our adolescents are facing here locally, and I think more broadly across the world. So as mental health struggles continue to rise among youth and services are increasingly stretched, a new report is calling for a province-wide strategy to address what is now one of the largest threats to kids in Alberta. So mental health concerns among children and youth in Alberta are increasing, while poor mental health remains one of the largest threats to childhood in Alberta. We also heard that 70% of Alberta's teens are reporting worse mental health than before the pandemic, and 1 in 4 parents are reporting their teen is showing a decline in mental health. Could I have the next slide, please? So young people between the ages of 15 and 24 are more likely to experience mental illness and substance use disorders than any other age group. And people with mental illness are twice as likely to have a substance use disorder compared to the rest of the population. So at least 20% of people with a mental illness have a co-occurring substance use disorder. And for people with schizophrenia, that number may be as high as 50%. So studies in various Canadian cities have indicated that between 23 and 67% of homeless people have a mental illness. Next slide, please. So what we know about the adolescent brain is it's a work in progress, and we have wholesale rewiring of the brain that occurs at this time when gonadal hormones come into play and start affecting the brain and the body. So we need to take that adolescent brain from childlike behavior and make it suitable to support adult behaviors. And that's why this rewiring happens at this time. Next slide, please. So if you think about how the brain works, if you have, we have a system that's our automatic system, and that is a rapid response system where we find ourselves in a stressful or threatening situation. You have an immediate response, and this is usually for protection. So this system is the one that will activate the sympathetic nervous system, get your heart racing, and make you feel like you have to take immediate action. So that's one side of the brain. The other side of the brain, and it's not really insides, but another component of the way the brain works is our intentional system. And this is through self-regulation and executive function. So we pay attention to the situation that we find ourselves in. We analyze the best approach and how to solve the problem that we're facing using inhibitory control, working memory, and mental flexibility, those important executive function skills. And it inhibits our automatic responses and allows us to think through the situation and provide a response that is very important for helping us achieve our goals. So although we have this natural tendency to have an automatic response, when you have well-developed executive function skills, it's able to reduce that acting out immediately and allow you to think through the situation before you respond to it. Next slide, please. So in 2022 and 2023, we piloted our adolescent curriculum at a school, and because we saw this wonderful success with our preschoolers, we gave 6 weeks of play to an adolescent group. So it was grade 6 in a middle school here. We had one classroom that got the games and one classroom that did not. And we used some tests of executive function pre-program in both classrooms and post-program in both classrooms. using a play curriculum. So we gave this play curriculum to the teachers, and we encouraged them to use it daily or at least 3 times a week, and to keep track of how many minutes they were playing with the children. One important point to note is the teachers play with the children. Next slide, please. So this curriculum of games was developed by 2 students who were in my lab, and they were both awarded national scholarships to work on this project. They came up with 10 games that they piloted with teenagers over the summer, and they found out which games the teenagers liked to play, which ones they didn't like to play. So we included those that the children liked to play in the curriculum. And this curriculum is also available on our buildingbrains.ca website. It's absolutely free, and we encourage people to have a look. So we first piloted at our local YMCA and at a club called Youth One, where our youth can just come and drop in over the summer. And that's where we got our initial feedback before we took it into the classrooms. Next slide, please. So what we learned, I'm just going to start with the panel that says females and males. So the pre-tests are blue, the post-tests are orange, and you can see that in the control classroom, the females showed a little bit of a gain over the 6 weeks. So that's just learning, and that's a good thing. But with the experimental classroom, this is the classroom that got the games. We saw a dramatic improvement, and it was very significant in the females. Now I want you to look at the males, and you can see that the males showed an increased improvement in the control classroom, even without the games, and about the same improvement in the experimental classroom. So one of the concerns I had about this timing for the games is in grade 6, the females have had their hormones, their pubertal hormones, for about a year or 2 longer than males, and we may have missed the mark for males. We may have been doing this too soon. And for males, I think we might have made a bigger difference if we had run this curriculum of games, excuse me, in grade 8 rather than grade 6. So one thing we did learn is that when the teachers gave us their times that they spent with the children playing games, we see that on the other side of the graph where it says dose in minutes on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, we see a percent gain in all executive function tasks, and you can see a highly significant correlation. Next slide, please. The other thing we do with youth is a Chess for Life program. These are justice-involved youth who have gotten in trouble with the law. In our area, the judge can sentence them to learning to play chess, which also builds their executive function skills. So we are currently testing how we are improving executive function skills in these children. Next slide, please. So we do know that if you think of a child as a scale, and you're trying to tip that scale into the positive domain where we have positive health outcomes, you can add positive experiences on the left-hand side of that scale. If you have negative experiences, it will tip it more to negative health outcomes. But you can also move the fulcrum. And if you move the fulcrum off to the right, a person can become more resilient through education and building executive function skills. And that's what we're attempting to do with the curriculum that we have here today. So moving the resilience scale off in a direction where it's easier to have positive outcomes. Next slide, please. So the bottom line is we can increase, if we increase resilience in children by improving executive function and strengthening relationships through play, as a society, we should see better academic success, better health, greater wealth, less crime, and reduced homelessness and addiction. Thank you. I think that's the end of my presentation. Oh, and at the very last slide was references. So if anybody is interested in obtaining this presentation, you can just contact the organizers, and they can share with you the link that will download the presentation for you. But at this point, I guess we can have questions. Oh, so the question is, what frequency is the play being administered? So for the preschoolers, the play was every day and several times a day. In the adolescent games, the teacher didn't do it as frequently. We tried to encourage them to include at least one play session for 15 minutes every day, but sometimes it was only 3 times a week. And even with that, we still saw significant improvement in the children after 6 weeks of play. Yeah, I do encourage everyone to go have a look at our website. I only mentioned a few of the play curriculums that are available there, but we also have some research posted. We have a blog that we add to on a regular basis. I think once a week it's updated. There's all kinds of information there. And we also have an area that is focused on Indigenous games for First Nations people in our area. So we collected games that they traditionally play, and we put together a curriculum of First Nations games as well. We also have all of our games translated into many different languages. So Arabic, Swahili, there is Ukrainian, French, Spanish. Many different translations are available, and we're always looking for people who have language skills who are interested in helping us translate more. And other than that, as I mentioned, it's all absolutely free. We're just hoping that people will make use of these resources, and we hope we can make a difference for kids, not just in our local area, but across Canada, across the world. Yes, thank you, Michelle. It was my pleasure to be here today, and thank you for introducing me. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.
To Gibb, hope you all enjoyed the session. Thank you everyone for attending and for your questions. We'll now end the session. Thank you again.